radiator in my old Civic knocked twice before I even pulled out of the driveway. I remember thinking that was fitting. Everything in my life was announcing itself on the way out. My brother stood on the porch with his arms crossed. His wife, Shay, was behind him, one hand resting on the door frame like she already owned it. Which, as of that Thursday evening, she kind of did. My mother hadn't even come outside. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I had already done my crying 3 years earlier in a hospital parking garage in Columbus, sitting in that same Civic with a box of my dad's things on the passenger seat. That was when I learned that grief has a shelf life, and mine had expired. I loaded 2 bags into the trunk. My laptop, my external drive. A box of documents I'd been slowly moving out over the past 6 weeks, a little at a time, like I was smuggling myself out of my own life. Because I knew this was coming. I just didn't know it would be a Tuesday in March, with a light drizzle and my brother using the word restructuring, like we were a Fortune 500 company instead of a family. Let me back up. My father built Hartwell Cabinet Works from nothing. Literally nothing. A rented garage in Dayton, Ohio, a used table saw, and 30 years of 6-day weeks. Custom cabinetry. The kind that goes in the homes of people who don't ask about price. By the time I was in middle school, we had 12 employees. By the time I graduated college, we had 41 and a second facility in Cincinnati. I went to work for my father the summer after graduation. Not because he asked me to, because I loved it. I loved the smell of sawdust in the morning. I loved the estimating software. I loved sitting across from clients who'd saved for years to redo their kitchen and watching their faces when they saw the first rendering. I was good at it. I got my MBA at night while working full-time, finished in 2.5 years, and started quietly rebuilding our pricing structure, our vendor contracts, our insurance coverage. My brother Trevor was there too, technically. He had the title of operations manager, which mostly meant he approved timesheets and took clients to lunch. Trevor is 7 years older than me, which means he spent most of my childhood ignoring me and most of my adulthood reminding me that he was there first. Then he met Shay. Shay is the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately identifies who has the most to lose. I don't mean that as a compliment. She married my brother 8 months after they met at a vineyard in Virginia that my parents paid for, and by Christmas of that year she had a standing desk in the corner of our conference room and an opinion about everything. She started small, suggesting we drop 2 of our longer-standing vendors in favor of her cousin's supply company, recommending we streamline the estimating process, which turned out to mean cutting the custom consultation phase that was literally our competitive advantage, proposing that certain roles were redundant. One of those roles was mine. She never said it directly. She's too smart for that. What she said was that the company needed to clarify its leadership structure going forward, and that family involvement should be formalized. What my mother heard was that Shay had ideas. What I heard was that I had maybe 8 months. I said nothing. I kept my head down. I kept working, and I kept building something on the side. My father had set up a small investment account for me when I was 19. A few $1,000s. Don't touch it until you're 30, he told me. I didn't, but I also added to it every year, quietly, automatically, from a separate checking account that I'd opened at a credit union in a different city. I maxed my Roth IRA every year from the time I was 24. I'd read enough about my family's financial habits to know that I needed something that was entirely mine, entirely invisible. By the time Shea arrived, I had a little over $340,000 in various accounts that no one in my family knew existed. Not because I was hiding from them exactly, because I had learned, slowly and then all at once, that money inside a family is never really private. It becomes leverage. It becomes a reason for someone to need something from you, or to resent you, or to make decisions about your life on your behalf. When the restructuring conversation started, I moved quietly. I contacted a business attorney in Indianapolis, far enough away that I wouldn't run into anyone. I started an LLC. I started talking to a commercial lender. I was building the exit before I needed it, which is the only way to actually escape. The conversation that ended everything happened on a Sunday. My mother had made pot roast, which she only does when she wants the occasion to feel normal. Trevor and Shay came over. My mother sat at one end of the table. I sat at the other. Shay had a folder. The folder contained a family business agreement that Trevor and my mother had apparently signed 3 weeks earlier. I was seeing it for the first time over pot roast. The agreement restructured ownership of Hartwell Cabinet Works. My mother retained a small percentage as a legacy share. Trevor and Shay received the operating majority. I was listed as a legacy consultant, with no operational role, no equity stake, and a 6-month severance offer contingent on signing a non-compete clause covering the entire state of Ohio. The non-compete was the tell. If I was just being restructured, they wouldn't need to cage me. They were afraid of what I knew and what I could do. I read the whole document at the table while everyone watched me, and no one touched their pot roast. I need some time to review this with an attorney, I said. My mother looked at the tablecloth. Trevor said, "We kind of need an answer this week." Shay smiled. I folded the document, put it in my purse, and asked if there was more bread. I did not sign. What I did instead was call my attorney in Indianapolis first thing Monday morning. Then I called the lender I'd been speaking to for 4 months. Then I called a commercial real estate broker I'd met at an industry conference in Nashville the previous fall. The thing about custom cabinetry is that the business lives in the relationships. The vendors who give you the good pricing because they trust you'll pay on time. The contractors who call you first because you always deliver. The clients who refer their neighbors because you made them feel like their project mattered. Most of those relationships were mine. Trevor had the title. I had the phone numbers. Within 30 days of that Sunday dinner, I had incorporated a new company, Hartwell & Co. Close enough to be recognizable, different enough to be legal. My attorney had reviewed the non-compete and identified 3 significant enforceability problems, including that it lacked specific geographic scope definition and had been presented without any negotiation period, which in Ohio creates a serious consideration problem. In plain English, the non-compete was sloppily drafted and probably wouldn't hold. My attorney sent a formal letter saying so. I never went back to the office. The severance ran for a few weeks before they stopped it. I hadn't cashed a single check. I let them sit in the credit union account while I watched. What I was watching for was what they would do with the business without me. It took 6 weeks. The first sign was when a contractor named Paulson called me on my cell, not the company line, my cell, asking where I'd gone. He'd submitted an invoice 3 times and hadn't heard back. I told him I'd left the company and gave him my new contact information. He moved his business to Hartwell & Co. within the month. Then I got a call from a vendor rep I'd worked with for years. She was confused. Someone from the company, she described Shay, though she didn't know her name, had called demanding a retroactive pricing adjustment, threatening to pull their account. The rep said, "I've never had anyone speak to me that way. I just wanted you to know." I sent her a sample contract from Hartwell & Co. She signed it within 2 weeks. I didn't call anyone. I didn't campaign. I just made myself available and let their behavior do the work. There's something I haven't mentioned yet because I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it. 4 months after I was pushed out, my mother called me. It was a Wednesday evening. I was in my apartment, a 2-bedroom I'd rented in Kettering quietly 2 months before the Sunday dinner, because I had already known, and I was eating leftover pasta and reviewing a proposal for a client in Dublin, Ohio. She didn't lead with an apology. My mother doesn't work that way. She led with, "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I told her I was fine. She said, "Trevor says the business is going through some adjustments." I said, "I imagine it is." Long pause. She said, "I thought the agreement was going to be good for everyone." I said, "I know you did." Another pause. I could hear the television in the background. She watches the news too loud. She has since my father died. I didn't know about the non-compete until after I signed, she said, quietly, like she was confessing something. I believed her. That's the thing about my mother that makes her both someone I love and someone I can't fully trust. She is genuinely passive in a way that allows terrible things to happen around her without her ever quite being responsible for them. She didn't design what happened to me. She just didn't stop it. Okay, I said. Okay, she repeated. I'm not angry with you, I said, but I'm also not coming back. She said she understood. I don't think she did. We said goodnight and I went back to my proposal. Here is what I knew that they didn't. My father had taken out a substantial line of credit against the business 18 months before he died. A decision I had helped him structure, which meant I had read every document, and which also meant I knew exactly how it was collateralized and what the covenant triggers were. The line required the business to maintain a minimum EBITDA threshold quarterly. Miss it twice in a row and the lender had the right to call the note. I had modeled out the financials before I left. With the vendor pricing Shay was disrupting, the contractor relationships bleeding out, and the consultation phase stripped from the process, I estimated they would miss that threshold in the third quarter. Possibly the second. I was wrong. They missed it in the first. I found out from my attorney who had done some quiet research. The lender had issued a technical default notice. Trevor and Shay were scrambling to refinance, but their credit profile was complicated by a judgment against Shay from a prior business dispute in Kentucky, something I had discovered during the months when I was watching and waiting. They needed capital. Fast. This is when I introduced myself as Crestline Business Partners. Crestline was a separate LLC I had incorporated in Delaware with a registered agent, a professional mailing address, and a very clean website. The name was intentional. It sounded like a regional private equity firm, the kind that buys distressed small businesses and either turns them around or strips them for parts. My attorney handled all the correspondence. I was never named. Crestline reached out to Hartwell Cabinet Works with a letter of interest. We expressed enthusiasm for the brand, the facilities, the customer relationships. We offered a preliminary valuation meeting. Trevor responded within 48 hours. Shay responded within 46. Over the next several weeks, Crestline requested documents, full financials, customer lists, vendor contracts, the line of credit agreement, the family business restructuring agreement, everything. They sent it all, every page, including the agreement that had stripped me out of my own family's company. My attorney had built a careful structure. What Crestline proposed was the acquisition of the operating assets, the equipment, the contracts, the vendor relationships, the name, while leaving the entity itself and its debt with Trevor and Shay. This is a legal structure called an asset purchase as opposed to a stock purchase. It's used all the time in legitimate transactions. In this case, it meant that the name Hartwell Cabinet Works would transfer to an entity controlled by Crestline. The debt would remain with Trevor and Shay's LLC. The employees, the good ones, the ones who had been there for years, would be offered positions with the new entity. The purchase price was structured as an earnout, meaning most of it was contingent on future performance and paid over time. The upfront cash component was just enough to satisfy the lender and prevent the default judgment. Trevor and Shay would walk away technically solvent with no business, no income, and a debt structure they'd have to unwind slowly. They signed on a Friday afternoon. My attorney called me when it was done. I was at my desk in Kettering, drinking coffee, finishing a proposal for a kitchen remodel in Worthington. It's done, he said. Good, I said. Do you want to be present for the transition meeting? Yes, I said. The transition meeting was held 2 weeks later at the Hartwell Cabinet Works facility in Dayton. I drove my Civic. The radiator was still knocking. I walked in through the front entrance. The receptionist, who had been with the company for 11 years and who I had personally trained on the estimating system, looked up and her face did something complicated. Hey, Val, I said. Hey, she said, and then, quietly, I'm glad you're here. My attorney was already in the conference room with the lender's representative and a notary. Trevor and Shay arrived 7 minutes late. Shay was carrying a leather portfolio. Trevor looked like he hadn't slept. They sat down. The lender's rep introduced himself. My attorney introduced himself. Then he introduced me. This is the principal of Crestline Business Partners, he said. Shay's face went still in that particular way that very controlled people's faces go still when they've been caught completely off guard. Trevor looked at me, then at my attorney, then back at me. "You," Trevor said. "Me," I said. It was quiet for a moment. Outside, I could hear the table saw in the back facility. Someone was working. Life was continuing. "You can't do this," Shay said, though her voice was missing its usual certainty. "The documents are already signed," my attorney said pleasantly. "The transfer is complete as of this morning." She looked at Trevor. He was looking at the table. I had thought about what I wanted to say in this moment for a long time. I had rehearsed versions of it in the shower, on drives, in the space between waking up and getting out of bed. Something sharp. Something that would land. What I said was, I just want the employees to have their jobs and the vendors to get paid on time. That's what I came here to make sure of. Then I picked up my copy of the executed agreement, thanked the lender's representative, and walked out into the Dayton morning. Val stayed. So did 9 of the other long-term employees. We offered everyone their jobs and gave them 2 weeks to decide. Only 2 people left, both of whom had been hired by Shay, both of whom I imagine felt their futures tied to hers. We kept the Hartwell name. It was my father's name. It was always going to stay. Trevor and Shay moved to Lexington 6 weeks later. I heard this from my mother, who told me in the careful tone she uses when she's relaying information she's not sure she should be relaying. I didn't ask follow-up questions. My mother and I talk on the phone every Sunday now. Not long calls, 30 minutes, sometimes less. She doesn't bring up the business and I don't either. We talk about the weather in Dayton and what she's watching on TV and sometimes, carefully, about my father. These conversations feel like something being rebuilt very slowly, one small piece at a time with no guarantee it will hold. I don't know if that's enough. Some days I think it's more than I expected. Hartwell & Co., which is what I still call it, the original Hartwell & Co., in Kettering, operates as a separate entity from the acquired Dayton facility. We have 2 locations now. 53 employees. I hired a general manager for Dayton and I run the Kettering side day to day. Last spring I bought a house, not the family house, not anything symbolic, just a 1960s ranch in Oakwood that needed new windows and had a big backyard. I have a dog now. He's enormous and useless and I love him completely. My father's old desk is in my home office. I brought it from the Dayton facility before the transition paperwork was finalized. No one objected. I sat in his chair for the first time the night I moved in, and I cried in a way I hadn't since that hospital parking garage, long and ugly and necessary. Then I got up and made coffee and looked at a proposal that needed finishing by morning. Some things you carry, some things you set down. The trick is knowing which is which. And most of the time you only figure that out afterward, when you're already on the other side, when the radiator has finally stopped knocking and the driveway is yours. I thought a lot about what made any of this possible, and it wasn't the money. The money was just math. What made it possible was a decision I made years before any of this happened. A decision to never let someone else's idea of who I was become the ceiling I lived under. Trevor didn't push me out because he was cruel. He did it because he had married someone who was strategic in a way he wasn't, and because it's easy to underestimate the person who never makes a scene. I was always the one who stayed late, answered the emails, fixed the vendor relationships, rebuilt the pricing model at 2 a.m. I was also the one who never asked for credit, never lobbied for a title, never made my value visible. I felt the work would speak. It did, just not loudly enough for people who weren't listening. That's the first thing I learned. Integrity without visibility is just silence. It's not enough to do the right thing. You have to build something that endures after the right thing gets taken from you. The second thing is harder to say out loud. When Shay sat at my father's table with that folder, I felt something break. Not my confidence, that came back. What broke was a version of the story I'd been telling myself, the one where family means safety, where the people who watched you grow up are the ones most invested in you continuing to grow. That story isn't always true. Some people who love you are also capable of failing you completely, and those two things can exist at the same time without either one canceling the other out. My mother didn't design what happened to me, but she signed the document before I knew it existed. I've spent a long time sitting with that. What I've come to is this: you can love someone and still hold them accountable for the harm they allowed. You can keep the relationship and still refuse to pretend the harm didn't happen. Both of those things are hard. Neither one is optional if you want to keep living honestly. Trevor lost a business he didn't earn the right to lead. Shay lost a company she tried to absorb before she understood what held it together. The people who stayed: Val, a crew in the back, the vendor rep who called me because no one had spoken to her with basic respect in months. They kept their jobs. The work my father built survived, which was the only outcome that actually mattered to me. I didn't win by being smarter or luckier. I won by being patient in the years before the fight started, by saving quietly, by building skills no one could take in a document, by understanding that the best time to prepare for the worst is long before you think you'll need to. If I could tell anyone anything from the other side of this, it's that the preparation is never wasted. The discipline you practice when nothing is on the line is exactly what holds you together when everything is. Not because the universe rewards good behavior. I don't believe in ledgers that balance themselves. I believe in the compound interest of choices made in private, when no one is watching, when there is no immediate payoff. My father's desk is in my home office now. Some mornings I sit in his chair before anyone else is awake, and I drink my coffee and I think about what he would say. I think he would say, "You held it together." I think he would mean the company. I think he would also mean me.